Member Noreen Evans will be here to address the group. Before that, we have another speaker, Jonathan Lightman. Apparently, even though Brian said he does not need an introduction, I thought I'd say a few things about him. He is the executive director and he's the senior lobbyist for FACC, and his focus is on the state budget, federal regulations, and legislation. You'll probably hear more about what he does in his remarks. To me, he's the guy that looks out for me in Sacramento, me as a teacher, and more importantly, he looks out for my students. So, Jonathan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Warren, and thank you, folks in Petaluma, and thank you, everyone here in Santa Rosa, for coming out. Today is it's a harsh day in terms of weather, and I think sometimes it's a harsh day any day when you want to come and talk about what the reality is and what the environment is. I have been working as the executive director of FACC for nearly 11 years, and I tend to begin my speeches with a joke or some kind of humor or something to kind of set the mood. I'm not doing that as of late because there is not a lot of humor in what we're dealing with, and so it doesn't really fit the subject. So, with your permission, I'll be a little bit drier, but I certainly would entertain any questions that you have anywhere along the line in terms of the remarks, because I think it's really important that everyone is educated as to what's happening. And I know coming in here, I had an opportunity to speak with some of the folks from disabled students, as well as some of your very talented part-time instructors and some full-time instructors. Everyone has a different level of concern, but I think that our concern together is what's going to happen with our jobs, our institutions, our students, our programs. And I mean, if anyone has other concerns than that, we want to hear that as well. But frankly, it's a common refrain. It's a real common refrain because the situation is dire and the situation is grim. I would tell you that the budget in any normal year it's a difficult thing to piece together. Some of you may have heard that California is one of 3 states that requires this 2/3 majority to approve a budget. People may not remember is that this actually predates all of us. This actually goes back to the 1930s. Those of you who are here, raise your hand if you were in California during Prop 13. Nearly all of you here. What happened prior to Prop 13 is that we needed a 2/3 vote to pass a budget, but not a 2/3 vote to raise taxes. That was simple majority. So Prop 13 then made California the only state in the country where you needed a 2/3 vote to both approve a budget and to increase taxes. But there was something that was a little bit more fundamental in terms of change with Prop 13. Because prior to Prop 13, there was a sentiment that when we needed to approve a budget for the state, we took a look not only at how much money we had, but we also took a look at what the demand was. How many more college students would there be? How many more people would need to access Medi-Cal? What would our situation be relative to transportation or to parks or to prisons or whatever other publicly funded service there was? But after Prop 13, what happened is that there became a division, and that's what we live with today. It's been 30 years, where we have one party that simply says, I'm just going to take a look at how much money we have, period, end of discussion, end of sentence. The other party has a fuzzier approach to it. It says, well, let's take a look at how much we have, but then let's take a look at the demand. Let's see if we can meet somewhere in the middle. But because we have this 2/3 requirement, both parties are even if one party has an overwhelming number of seats in the legislature, since if they don't have 2/3 in both houses, frankly, they need the other party. And if the other party is very disciplined and says, we will not at all entertain the question of what is the need, rather how much money do we have, it's almost impossible for those two parties to come together. That's the permanent reality that we have in this state, the absolute permanent reality. And so frankly, any of you who engage over the state budget here in Sacramento have understood that for the past, not for the past year, but the past 30 years, What the legislature has done is, in essence, they have passed 10-month budgets, meaning they've passed a spending plan for a year with the idea that they've known that revenues would come in for about 10 months and that the final 2 months they would pray to make sure that the revenues actually come in. Typically they don't, and so then we would enter the next year with fewer resources than what we plan. And so, for instance, if you are an adjunct faculty member and you wonder why every single year your needs are being deferred, that is the reason. It's because the revenues never match what the expectation was. That's the permanent reality. We are now in a new permanent reality, which is that we are not anticipating revenues to come in and to hold for 10 months. We're anticipating revenues to hold for 6 months. That is the new permanent reality. And we will continue in this capacity until somewhere, someplace, whether it be in Sacramento or in Washington, decides that we need to alter that landscape. But this is our position in history right now. It's not a good one. If you are in a public service position, which you all are, you now have to understand this, because the point, in fact, how many of you have ever encountered a colleague who says, I'm not political, I came here to be a faculty member or a DSPS or EOPS? Raise your hand if you've ever heard that before. You know, and you know what the answer to that is that if you're not political, politics will find you, period. Now, we know that most of you signed up to work here because you want to be a faculty member, or you want to be a counselor, or you want to run a program or something like that, and you didn't come here because you want to be a lobbyist. Otherwise, you'd be where we are in Sacramento, which is not that nice compared to over here, or even compared to Petaluma up there. And no one expects you to. No one expects you to be full-time in Sacramento. The problem is that without being more engaged and without making the impression that you are organized, that you are powerful, and that you are as important as every other constituency that comes up to Sacramento on a regular basis, the moment that there is any kind of weakness, that's the moment that anyone here, including all of us, we're all stamped across for purposes of another group that's a little bit more organized than us. So, how do we enter this year? Remember, we talked about this new permanent reality. We went through 3 budget cycles this year, in a single year. 3 budget cycles. Those of you who have ever witnessed the state budget in Sacramento want to do it once, not once a year, you'd want to do it once in a career, and then say, gee, I don't ever want to do this. I remember one time there was a faculty leader, and she really wanted to see what the budget conference committee was like. And I said, fine, come out on a Sunday. And she said, what, are you crazy? They're working on Sundays? I said, yeah, they're working on Sundays, and they're working all night. So come out, and we'll take 2 hours. And you will sit with me for 2 hours, because I will be there for 2 weeks straight. And she was, after 2 hours, she was like, I have to get out of here. And I'm like, well, bye, you know, because it's the funniest thing. We get calls in the FAC office, usually during June, when the Joint Legislative Budget Committee literally is meeting for 2 weeks straight. That's weekends, nights, sometimes all night. And we get calls from folks and say, oh, you guys must be on vacation now. No, that's a very busy time for us, you know. That's an extremely busy time. We had to do that 3 times in a year this year. Those of you who may remember, so the 08-09 budget was an 85-day delay. That was the longest delay ever in the state's history. We were able to emerge from that budget as community colleges relatively unscathed. And when I say that relatively unscathed, there was something that was very important to everybody in this room, and that was your cost of living adjustment. And frankly, most of that was gone as of the September budget from last year. But the rest of it we were able to preserve. Well, 6 months later, what the legislature did is they pieced together the shortfall from 08-09, and then they added the projected shortfall from 09-10, and they said there would be a $41 billion